family loves sandwiches, and I found that the best way to make sourdough sandwich bread is by using the Japanese-inspired sang-song method for making, it's called Japanese milk bread, also known as Hokkaido, and it is delicious and has become our new favorite for really soft sandwich bread. And this I make with whole wheat flour, and it stays soft for up to 7 days. So I can't wait to show you how to make this so that you can enjoy this with your family. Hi, I'm Jenny Pryor from Living Bread Baker. Today I'm going to walk you through making my whole wheat sourdough Hokkaido milk bread. It's the Japanese inspired method, and you are going to love how these techniques create a bread that's really soft and actually stays softer without added preservatives like they use at grocery stores. So the first thing you're going to do is this recipe uses a stiff starter. So you're going to mix together the ingredients to make your starter or your special levain to make this recipe. We're using a stiff starter. This is going to be a higher percentage of flour compared to the water, and this creates a better rise in the bread. It also makes it more sweet and less sour in the final product. Once the stiff starter is active, and this is going to take anywhere from 8 to 14 hours, then it is time to mix up your dough. So you're going to get all your dough ingredients out. There are a few steps to do this, and so that's why my recipe, I'm making 2 loaves. So you can half these ingredients if you'd like, but I find that for all the work I'm doing, I'd rather make 2 loaves with this process. So get your ingredients out, make sure that your butter is softening, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to scald the milk. To scald the milk, add a little bit more milk than the recipe calls for to allow for evaporation. I usually add 30 to 60 more grams of milk. Put this in your small pot or saucepan, and you're going to heat this on medium high to high and keep an eye on it. Once you see steam coming off it and you look at the bottom of the pan and there's some protein starting to stick to the bottom of the pan, turn off the heat, and you're going to pour the scalded milk into a heat-safe carafe like the graduated measure you're seeing here. Set this aside, and it's time to make the really special ingredient that makes this Hokkaido or this Japanese milk bread. It's time to make the sang-song. And I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but you can see the spelling in the full post of the recipe. So for this, we're mixing up flour and water. You can also use milk. I found that by just using water, I get the same results in the final product. So you can either use half of the liquid as milk or half as water. The results are going to be great. I prefer to save some of the milk for my family because we go through milk very quickly. You want to mix this up until there are no lumps in flour, that all the flour is mixed in. It's going to be a very thin mixture of flour and water. And in that same saucepan that you heated up your milk, you're going to cook the flour and water mixture. So make sure you're standing by to stir this pretty consistently with a large spoon to make sure it doesn't get burnt or stuck. But what you're going to see is that as the flour cooks in that liquid, all of the starches will start to explode, and what it creates is a sticky, really starchy mixture that looks like mashed potatoes. Now this sang-song, because of how thick it is with all the starch, it's going to hold in the heat really well, which we don't want to add it yet to our dough. So in order to help it to cool down, I like to put it back in the bowl that I was mixing it in and spread it out as much as possible so that it can cool down faster. So you're going to set this aside, set your milk aside, and let these ingredients cool down. You can also use a thermometer to check the temperature. I want things to be around 100 to 110 degrees, especially for the starchy mixture, because it can hold in so much heat. Now that our scalded milk is cooled down, we're going to start to slowly build up our dough. And you can use a very large bowl. If you have a large capacity mixer, that works great. The mixer I'm using here is going to be a large capacity one that works for this quantity of dough. But if you are using a standard KitchenAid mixer, a stand mixer that's 3 to 4 quarts, it might overflow. So I'd recommend just using a large bowl. So to your large bowl, you're going to add a little bit of water, your scalded milk that is now cooled down, your salt, sugar, the stiff starter. And for the stiff starter, you're basically adding the whole batch that you made because it's a special batch that you made for this recipe. So your regular sourdough starter should be separate and set aside so that you're not worried about using all that up. And then our sang-song, we're going to add all of that in. It should be cool enough. And then once you have these ingredients added, you notice that we left the eggs out and the butter because we're going to save that for later. So you have your water, milk, salt, sugar, the stiff starter, the tangzhong, and now it's time to add our flours. I'm using a blend of bread flour and whole wheat flour. The whole wheat flour I'm using is fresh milled, but whole wheat flour from the grocery store that is a hard wheat is going to work really well because it's going to have a higher gluten content. Just don't use any soft whole wheat flour. And so before we add the eggs or the butter, we want to give this a mix because I want the temperature of all these ingredients to be well dispersed throughout the dough so there's no hot spots. So mix this a few times, either by hand or with your stand mixer until you have a rough looking dough. And once you have that rough looking dough, it's time to add the eggs. If you're making a single loaf, then you're only using 1 egg, but I'm making a double, so I'm using 2 eggs here. So mix in the eggs and make sure you continue mixing until your dough looks strong. You want to see your dough starting to be full, all the ingredients to be fully incorporated, and for the dough to be pulling away from the sides of the bowl and also to be cleaning off the dough hook. You will want to use a dough scraper to scrape down the sides of your bowl or your dough hook to make sure that you are getting all those ingredients incorporated. We don't want any flour or any ingredients not getting fully mixed into the dough during this kneading stage. Continue kneading the dough until it's starting to look smooth. Once it looks smooth, we're going to add our softened butter. And I like to add it 1 tablespoon slice at a time. So cut off a tablespoon, put it into the dough, mix and knead, and then continue adding the butter until it's all incorporated. And then we're going to continue mixing this butter in, continue to knead the dough until your dough is soft, supple. It should be smooth. It should not be sticking to your hands or the bowl. It should be pulling away nicely. And when you poke the dough, it should give an indentation, should have that bounce back that's showing that there's gluten development happening. And so once you see these signs, it is time to let the fermentation take place. So I'm using a Cambro. I love using Cambros because it gives me a visual indicator of how much volume has been built up. So I'm using a large 6-quart one here. This dough is going to sit and ferment at room temperature for 4 to 6 hours. And if you want to see that Cambro, it's down linked below. So as this is fermenting at room temperature, you're going to see an increase in volume. You're also going to see the texture of the dough becoming more soft and smooth. I'm going to have a full video post I'll link here for you, just so you can see more about what bulk fermentation signs of readiness look like. So once it is completely done with this bulk ferment, we see the double in volume, we see that smooth texture, and we see that consistency change. It's not really sticky anymore. It is time to divide and shape our dough. I'm going to put my dough out onto an unfloured surface, and while it's sitting there, I'm going to prepare my loaf pan. So I like to cut parchment to fit inside my loaf pans. I like to line my loaf pans with parchment paper. This allows the bread to come out really easily, makes really nice and tidy cleanup. So I just cut them at 4 different spots and create flaps on the ends and tuck the excess parchment behind to create little liners. You can see a video post about how I do that in more detail. So now my loaf pans are prepared, my dough is out. I'm going to use a bench knife or a dough scraper to separate my mass of dough into 6 pieces to make 2 loaves of my bread. If you're only making 1 loaf, you're only going to divide it into 3 pieces. I recommend using a scale in order to get each piece to be about the same weight. You want them within 5 grams of each other. What I like to do is I like to separate the dough visually into 6 pieces, and then I will check my weights using a kitchen scale to make sure that each piece of dough is within 5 grams of each other. And if not, I will make adjustments by cutting a piece from any larger piece of dough and adding it to the smaller pieces until they're about equal in weight. Having your dough in equal amounts of weight will allow them to cook at the same rate. If you have too much dough in one pan, it's going to bake more slowly than the other one. So we really want to make sure this is fairly precise. So once I have my dough divided, I'm going to pre-shape these balls into just rough circles by making sure the top is smooth, tucking the rough ends underneath the mass of dough until I have 6 nice smooth balls of dough. And then for shaping, this is a really fun part of this style of bread. It has a really unique shape. And so I'm going to take each piece of dough one at a time. I'm going to lightly flour my surface, and I'm going to flip the ball of dough upside down so that smooth side of the ball of dough is on top of the flour. And then I'm using a rolling pin to roll out the dough. You might want to add a little bit of flour to your rolling pin to make sure it doesn't stick. You're going to roll out your dough until it's about 5 inches. by 9 inches in a rectangular shape. Once it has an even thickness and it has those dimensions, we're going to take the sides on the longest ends of your dough, the 9-inch sides, and we're going to fold in 2 inches on each side. And you'll notice that these don't perfectly meet. There's an overlap, and we want the overlap so that our ball of dough is higher in the middle, it doesn't cave in. And then once you have this shape, press down that seam so they stay in place, and then you're going to roll up your dough into a snail-like shape. Once it's in this snail-like or spiral shape, set it to a side and repeat with 2 more rounds of dough. Once you have 3 of these snail-like or spiral shapes of dough, you are going to carefully put them into one of your loaf pans. And you want the spiral ends to be facing towards the outside of your loaf pans. You'll see 3 beautiful spirals on the sides of your bread. And if you're making a double batch like I am, you'll do this with the other 3 pieces of dough so that both loaves will be shaped with these beautiful spiraled balls of dough in each loaf pan. Cover your loaf pans with plastic wrap, and you're gonna let these proof at room temperature. And at room temperature, they will need to proof for 1.5 to 3 hours. You're gonna look for them to be about double in volume. They should be coming over the edge of your loaf pan. When you gently press on the top of your dough, it should leave an indentation that stays there. If it bounces back quickly or bounces back within 5 minutes, then give it a little more time to proof. Once our loaves are proofed, it is time to preheat our oven. If it's really warm in your kitchen, then I would recommend putting these loaves, still covered with plastic, into your fridge while your oven is preheating. And during this preheating process, you're gonna add a pan of water. So I'm putting about 1 inch of water into a oven-safe pan. I'm just using a metal pan. Make sure you allow enough room on that center rack for these loaves bread to sit and expand. Once your oven is preheated, we're going to create an egg wash so that we can create a beautiful sheen on these loaves of bread. Once you mix up your egg wash, take a pastry brush and brush it generously on the tops of your loaves. Once you have a nice coating of egg wash on top of each round of dough, it is time to put them into the oven. So you're gonna put them in the oven with your nice steam that's been created during the preheating process, and make sure this cooks with the steam for 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, I recommend removing the steam, and then we're gonna continue baking it without the steam to finish off the bake. When you're removing the steam from the oven, take care that hopefully the steam has all the water has evaporated. But if there's still water left in your pan and you are not comfortable removing it for safety reasons, you can leave this steamy pan in there. Just leave your oven cracked a little bit, or put on some really good quality oven mitts to remove it carefully. In order to check your readiness, because your oven might bake differently than mine, I recommend baking it to the minimal amount recommended in the recipe and then testing it with a thermometer. Insert into your dough, insert it into the center. Don't try to touch the bottom of the pan, because the bottom of the pan will be much hotter than the center of the dough. Try to get to the center of your dough, and you want your dough to be 195 to 200 degrees. And when you pull out the thermometer, there should be no sticky dough on the end of it. It should come out fairly clean. So once your loaves are out of the oven, you're gonna take them out of the pan and put them on the cooling rack and give them a few minutes so they're not too hot, usually about 5 to 10 minutes. And then you're gonna carefully peel off those pieces of parchment paper. And I love reusing these. That's why I love parchment, because I can just reuse it. And let these cool for, I recommend 30 minutes to an hour, because if you cut into bread when it's still hot and steamy, you're going to let precious moisture escape from your bread, which is gonna dry it out in the long run and create staleness. So we really want to let these breads cool, and any bread cool, for best results, especially if you plan to keep this for a few days. Once your bread is completely cooled down, it's no longer warm to the touch, then you can either leave it out overnight or put it in your bread bin. Just make sure it's completely cooled down if you put it in a bread box, so there's no steam that will make the bread expire more quickly. And you can enjoy this bread. Mine stays soft for up to 7 days. Where I live, depending on your humidity, it might change how quickly this bread goes stale. But I live here in a dry Northern California, and it stays soft for a long time. I love this for toast, for sandwiches, The whole family loves it, from the baby to the adults. And it also has that healthy whole wheat flour in it for more flavor and more texture and more fiber. So I'm really excited for you to make this recipe for your family. I hope that I've simplified this process. This bread is well worth the effort, I will tell you. That's why I recommend making 2 loaves for your week. So if you enjoyed this video, please like it, share it with a friend, and if you want more sourdough content and help, please subscribe, and I would love to see you next time as I help you make sourdough bread and create your lifelong journey connecting with other people through sourdough.